At the end of Jesus' ministry, he gave what we call the Great Commission, his final instructions to his disciples. And we typically think of the Great Commission in terms of Matthew chapter 28. But in this video, I want us to think about the Great Commission in John. Now, before we get to John, let's go to Matthew 28, and you'll see why in a moment. Familiar words, I hope. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Now, I don't want to dwell on that too much, so I'm not going to draw our attention to everything. I do want us to notice the main instruction, which is to go make disciples. And then he tells them how to make disciples with the baptizing them and teaching them to observe language that's here, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that's the Trinity, of course, and then teaching them to observe everything, all that I have commanded you. We've got this statement of comfort at the end as well. I am with you always to the end of the age. It's a wonderful and a familiar commission, right? This is what Jesus told his disciples. What about in John's gospel? Does he give them that same great commission? Doesn't have to. It's a different book, different writer with different emphases, but I do think it's interesting to notice what we're going to see here in John's gospel. So in John 20, upper room, Jesus is raised from the dead. He's back with his disciples. And in the midst of that, John 20, verses 21 and 22, he says, as the Father has sent me, as the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. Try that again. There we go. And then he goes on and breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. There's the sense of the same elements here. It's a much shorter statement, but I want us to see how these relate to Matthew's commission. And we're going to see that actually there's quite a big connection here. So let me put the Matthew elements in. I've had to trim it down slightly, and apologies for losing the definition of the Trinity. That wasn't anything deliberate, just needed to make it fit. So we've got the authority. We've got the commission, the go make disciples. We've got what I've called here bringing in. So where he tells them to baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is about bringing people into God's family and then teaching them to obey. That's building them up in God's family. And then the comfort at the end, behold, I am with you always. So what have we seen in John? In John 20:21, we've got the authority. As the Father has sent me. Jesus is the one, all the way through John's gospel, sent from the Father. Question is, for us humans, do we receive him or do we reject him? But he comes with authority. He comes with the full force of the Father's weight and significance and position behind him. As the Father has sent me. And then he says, so I am sending you. Even so, same way. That the full weight and authority and force, if you like, of who Jesus is and what he's achieved, his position, all of that is behind his followers who are sent out. And then, of course, we mentioned the receive the Holy Spirit, following on from that. Remember, for several chapters, Jesus has been saying to his disciples who are really concerned, chapters 14, 15, 16, they're concerned because Jesus is leaving. And throughout those chapters, what does he say to them? Look, I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to send you another helper. I'm going to send you another counselor. He will be with you. And, it's through the Spirit that there'll be that in the vine connection with Jesus. And so that piece of it is there as well. In John terms, it's more overtly about the Holy Spirit, but it's essentially saying a very similar thing. Jesus is with us as we go to obey the Great Commission. We do not go alone. But there are two gaps on this chart. What do we do about that? I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's not there, but I think it is. When you come to the end of John 20, you get the final statement about these things being written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. It's like John is tying a bow on the gospel, and you sort of go, oh, that was wonderful. Oh, wait, there's another chapter. And you come into chapter 21, and you've got Peter, and you've got 6 of the disciples with him, and they're back in Galilee. And Peter says, I'm going fishing. And they head out fishing. I don't know if they were discouraged or depressed or dejected or distracted. I don't know what was going on with the disciples. Maybe they just felt flat after the adrenaline of that first Easter. And next morning, Jesus is walking on the beach and he calls out to them, hey, young men, what have you caught? And they said, nothing. Hadn't caught a thing all night. He said, put your nets down on the other side of the boat. And they did it. And at some point in that sleepy, tired operation of throwing the nets in one last time, as the fish swarmed into those nets, it kind of twigged. They remembered the disciple that Jesus loved said, hey, it's the Lord. I love the fact that Jesus in John 21 doesn't come to his tired and weak and discouraged disciples and give them a good seeing to. He doesn't, beat them up with his words. Instead, what does he do? He gently reminds them of things that they already knew, things that he had already taught them. And so for those first verses in John 21, essentially he's reminding them of Luke chapter 5, the time when at the very beginning they'd been in the boat and he'd said, put the nets down on the other side, and they thought he was crazy, and then the nets were full, and then he said, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. What we have here in John 21, the first half of it really is a reminder that they are supposed to be fishing, to be bringing people into God's family. And then, of course, he pulls Peter aside and talks to Peter, and 3 times he asks him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And 3 times Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And then 3 times Jesus reinstates him. He goes through this statement, I forget the order now, but feed my sheep, tend my lambs, feed my lambs, something like that. He's putting Peter kind of back into position of ministry, if you like, but he's saying to the disciples, yeah, look, he's still got that role, you still have that role. And so that's the building up element. See that it's not just about bringing people into God's family, but also about building people up in God's family. And there you have John giving us the same elements of the Great Commission as Matthew. Matthew gives it to us in a statement. John weaves it through those final days between Jesus and the disciples. Either way, the question is not whether these elements are in the 2 different Gospels or not. I think they are. The real question is, are these truths seared into our hearts? Are they woven into the fabric of our being, that as the Father sent the Son, so the Son has sent us? And that we are here to be fishers and feeders, that we are to be bringing people in and building them up, and that we have the Holy Spirit. We're not alone in what we're doing. Has the Great Commission, Matthew's version or John's version, really gripped us?